Well, since the horrific Hamas terror attacks on October 7 last year, there's been a shocking rise in anti-Semitism around the world. The situation's become so bad here in Australia that many Jewish residents in Sydney were too scared to venture out last night for New Year's Eve celebrations. And this morning, a 76-year-old Jewish doctor was hospitalised after being beaten in the head as he collected his rubbish bins in the Melbourne suburb of Brighton. Police have arrested a man in relation to that attack, and shockingly, police say they intend to release the alleged attacker on summons. Now, recent Victoria Police figures published in the Herald Sun show there were 153 anti-Semitic incidents recorded between October 7 and December 20. 153, that's compared with 28 anti-Muslim incidents. Now, accounting for population differences, those statistics mean Jewish Victorians are 32 times more likely than Muslim Victorians to face a hate incident during that period. Joining me now is Australian Jewish Association President David Adler. David, are you surprised by those statistics? Because if you listen to politicians and law enforcement officials, you'd think that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia were equally problematic right now.
James, we are shocked by those statistics, and we're shocked by what's happened in Australia, across Australian society. I didn't expect in my lifetime to see the explosion of anti-Semitism, but the statistics that you quoted are really only the surface. If you look at the nature of the incidents, they're completely different. We have had numerous death threats, we've seen assaults in our community, and perhaps if I relate a question and answer in a meeting I had with counter-terrorism police a few weeks ago, because we had been passing information to them about various threats against the Jewish community. And many of these, unfortunately, as implied by those statistics, arose out of the Muslim community. Not all, but many did. And I asked them, have there been any significant threats from the Jewish community directed at Muslims?
Right.
And their answer was zero. So I think the Islamic ones tend to be insults on social media, or perhaps an insult in the streets. But in terms of significant threats that come to the police attention, it's one-way street.
I want to take you through a few incidents I saw over the weekend. Have a look at this protest on New Year's Eve in Melbourne. I want to get your thoughts on it.
Sure.
5, 6, 7, 8. Israel is a terrorist state. 1, 2, 3, 4. Occupation terror law. 5, 6, 7, 8. Israel is a terrorist state. No celebration. No celebration. No celebration.
So, David, with those sort of protests on the streets New Year's Eve, no wonder the Jewish community was saying we don't feel safe to go out and celebrate the new year.
Well, we actually encourage people to go out and to do normal activities. But what you're seeing there is propaganda. It's not based on fact. It doesn't provide any sort of balance. It doesn't comment on the terrorism that provoked the conflict. And it shouldn't be happening on Australian streets. I mean, we believe in the right to protest and free speech, but this is getting very, very close to incitement.
Yeah.
It's inciting hatred against a particular community. It's getting very close in some cases to inciting violence. And we are disappointed that our law enforcement authorities haven't been more rigorous in applying the law.
I think you're being very generous saying they haven't been more rigorous. They haven't been anywhere near rigorous at all. Give me your thoughts on this anti-Israel protest in Sydney, where a child is used to lead chants against Jews.
Resistance is justified when Palestine is occupied.
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 David, when you've got a kid saying that resistance is justified, by which I presume the rape, the beheadings, the murders, the hostages of Jewish people. Aren't we just creating another generation of Jew haters in this country with antics like that? It's highly irresponsible.
100%, James. What you're seeing there is very close to the sort of brainwashing that Hamas does in the UNRWA schools. The teaching of hatred, the teaching of anti-Semitism, the teaching that they must sacrifice their blood for the cause. They do it by chants, they do it by propaganda, they do it by indoctrination, and they start at kindergarten level. There are many videos of kindergartens doing what we would regard as plays, but they're actually role-playing terrorism. This is the first step that we've seen on the streets of Sydney.
Yeah, horrific. I want to show you an image that I saw over the weekend. It's an Abolish Australia shirt draped in a Palestinian flag. I want to ask you, David, does that suggest there's more to anti-Semitism than just anti-Israel protests? Do you think there's a general hatred of Western civilization involving many of these people and the motivations for their protests?
It's a really interesting observation that, Abolish Australia is a very powerful message.
Yeah.
And what we have been finding is that if you're into one of the isms, if you're into socialism, if you're into communism, if you're into Nazism, if you're into Islamism, in other words, an ideology which is contrary to Western society, which is contrary to Judeo-Christian values, then almost reflexly you will have, consciously or unconsciously, a hatred of Israel.
Right.
You will campaign, because that's where it all began. That's where the Judeo-Christian values began. That's where the moral codes of the Ten Commandments and the subsequent developments were implemented. That's where both the Judeo and Christian side began. So we are seeing an active undermining of Western civilization. It's not an exaggeration to say this is a civilization war, and that Israel versus Hamas is just the tip of the iceberg. Abolish Australia, what's that got to do with a conflict in Gaza?
It's interesting you say that, because there is support for the Jewish community coming from Christians in Australia, and the Australian Christian lobby have begun a campaign against anti-Semitism.
Look, this is very heartwarming, and we're very grateful for it, because there have been times, frankly, when the Jewish community has felt both vulnerable and isolated. And to learn a couple of weeks ago that the Australian Christian lobby was launching a campaign against anti-Semitism, and one of the initiatives is an online petition. And if I might appeal to all the Sky listeners,
do it.
Simply to go to the ACL website, which is acl.org.au. Sign the petition if you oppose anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, or religious or not. If you are prepared to put your name to opposing anti-Semitism, it costs nothing. It's something that everyone can do, and we would like to deliver a massive sign of support to the authorities that they need to be more effective.
Terrific. I'd encourage everybody to do that. David Adler, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, James.